The autumn wind swept through the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge, Texas, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another harsh winter. The wooden buildings lining the street creaked under the weight of the late afternoon sun, their weathered boards telling stories of survival in this unforgiving frontier town. Mary Whitfield sat on the rough wooden steps outside Miller's General Store, her 7-year-old daughter Clara pressed against her side. The child's small frame shivered despite the wool shawl Mary had wrapped around them both. They had arrived in Cedar Ridge 3 days ago with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a handful of coins that had run out yesterday morning. "Mama, I'm hungry," Clara whispered, her blue eyes, so like her late father's, looking up with a trust that broke Mary's heart. "I know, sweetheart, just a little longer." Mary's voice caught as she smoothed down Clara's tangled blonde hair. She had knocked on every door in town, offered to wash, mend, cook, anything for a meal and a place to sleep. But Cedar Ridge was small, and times were hard for everyone. The sound of heavy boots on the boardwalk made Mary look up. A man approached, tall and broad-shouldered, his weathered face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his life working the land, his spurs jingling softly with each step. Ethan Cole had come to town for supplies, as he did every 2 weeks, but something about the woman and child huddled on the steps made him pause. He'd seen desperation before. It was common enough in these parts, but there was something in the woman's bearing, the way she held her chin up despite her circumstances. That caught his attention. "Ma'am." He touched the brim of his hat. His voice was deep, roughened by years of shouting over cattle and wind. Mary straightened, pulling Clara closer. "Sir." Ethan studied them for a moment. The woman was young, maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. Her dress, though clean, showed signs of hard travel. The child looked even worse for wear, her small face pinched with hunger. "You new to Cedar Ridge?" "Yes, sir. We arrived Monday." Mary's pride warred with her desperation. "We're looking for work. Work's hard to come by for a woman alone." It wasn't a question. Ethan had seen enough widows pass through to know the signs. "I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole." He shifted his weight, seeming to come to some decision. "I run the Double C Ranch, about 5 miles north of here." Mary waited, hope and wariness battling in her chest. Ethan removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. What he was about to say went against every notion of propriety, but winters were long and lonely, and his daughter Sarah needed more than a father who barely knew how to braid her hair. "Your daughter needs a home," he said, his gray eyes meeting Mary's directly. Then, with a frankness that belonged to the frontier, where survival often trumped society's rules, he added, "And my bed needs a wife." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Mary's face flushed, her arm tightening around Clara. Several people passing by slowed their steps, eager for gossip. "How dare you?" Mary began, starting to rise. "Hear me out," Ethan said quickly, holding up a hand. "I'm not some scoundrel looking for— That's not what I meant." He sighed, clearly uncomfortable with explaining himself. "I'm a widower. Lost my wife to fever 2 years back. I've got a daughter, Sarah. She's 9. I need help raising her, keeping house. And yes, I need a wife, a real wife. But I'm offering marriage, ma'am, legal and proper. A home for you and your girl." Mary sank back down, her indignation deflating into confusion. "You're proposing marriage? To a complete stranger? Folks do it all the time out here. Mail-order brides, arranged matches." Ethan replaced his hat, his expression serious. "I'm not a rich man, but I've got 300 acres, good cattle, and a solid house. Your daughter would have food, clothes, schooling. You'd have a home." "Mama?" Clara's small voice piped up. "Does the man have a house? A real house?" Ethan's stern features softened as he looked at the child. "I do, little one, with a big kitchen and a fireplace tall as your mama." Mary's mind raced. It was absurd, offensive even. But Clara hadn't eaten in 2 days, and winter was coming. She thought of the men in Colorado who might still be looking for them, of the debts her late husband had left behind. "I need to think," she said finally. "Fair enough." Ethan reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a few coins, pressing them into Mary's palm despite her attempted protest. "Get yourself and the girl a meal at Murphy's. I'll be loading supplies for the next hour. If you're interested, we can ride out to the ranch. Let you see the place before you decide anything." He touched his hat again and walked away, leaving Mary staring at the coins in her hand. An hour later, after the first hot meal they'd had in days, Mary found herself helping Clara up into Ethan Cole's wagon. The child, her belly full and her spirits lifted, chattered excitedly about the promised house. "You don't have to decide anything today," Ethan said as he clicked to the horses. "Just come see the place. Meet Sarah. If it doesn't suit, I'll bring you back to town. No questions asked." Mary nodded, clutching her daughter close as the wagon rolled out of Cedar Ridge. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the endless grassland in shades of gold and amber. She stole glances at the man beside her, the strong profile, the capable hands on the reins. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense, but there was something solid about him, like the mountains that rose in the distance. "Why?" she asked suddenly. "Why offer this to strangers?" Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the rutted trail ahead. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," he said finally. "And because my Sarah's growing up wild as a Mustang. She needs a woman's guidance." He paused, then added more quietly, "And maybe because I'm tired of talking to cattle and the wind." Despite everything, Mary found her lips twitching toward a smile. It was the first honest thing anyone had said to her in months. As the wagon rolled through the sea of grass, Clara's head grew heavy against Mary's shoulder. The child had fallen asleep, trusting as only children could be. Mary envied her that innocence. She had learned too young that the world could be cruel, that men could promise love and deliver only pain and debt. But as she watched Ethan Cole's weathered hands guide the horses with gentle expertise, as she listened to him point out landmarks in a voice that held genuine pride in his land, she wondered if perhaps, in this vast and unforgiving country, there might still be room for second chances. The sun touched the horizon as they crested a small rise, and Ethan pointed ahead. "There it is, the double C." Mary looked, and despite her reservations, despite the unconventional proposition that had brought her here, she felt something in her chest ease at the sight. It wasn't fancy, just a solid 2-story house with a wide porch, smoke rising from the chimney, set against the endless sky. But it looked like what she and Clara had been searching for since they'd fled Colorado. It looked like it could be home. The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house, and Mary felt Clara stir against her shoulder. The child's eyes opened, blinking in the fading light. "Is this the house, Mama?" Clara whispered, her voice filled with awe. Before Mary could answer, the front door burst open and a girl came running out, her dark braids flying behind her. She stopped short at the sight of the strangers, her gray eyes, so like her father's, wide with curiosity. "Papa, who are they?" Ethan climbed down from the wagon and helped Mary and Clara to the ground. "Sarah, these are our guests, Mrs. Whitfield and her daughter Clara. Ladies, this is my daughter, Sarah." Sarah studied them with the direct gaze of a child raised without much social polish. Her dress was clean but mended in several places, and her boots were scuffed from hard wear. "Are you the new housekeeper Papa went to town to find?" "Sarah." Ethan's voice carried a gentle warning. Mary felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "Your father and I are discussing possibilities." "Come inside," Ethan said, lifting Clara down with surprising gentleness. "It's getting cold, and I imagine you could use some coffee." The house was exactly as Mary had expected. Clean, but lacking any feminine touch. The furniture was sturdy and practical. The walls bare, except for a single photograph of a woman with kind eyes and Sarah's features. Everything spoke of a man doing his best, but clearly out of his depth. "I'll make coffee," Ethan said, then paused, looking embarrassed. "Unless, would you prefer tea?" "I think Margaret, my late wife." She kept some somewhere. Coffee is fine, Mary said softly, touched by his awkwardness. While Ethan busied himself in the kitchen, Sarah circled Clara like a curious colt. How old are you? 7, Clara answered shyly. I'm 9. Do you know how to ride? Can you rope a calf? Papa's been teaching me, but he says I need to learn girl things too. Sarah's face scrunched up at the thought. I can sew, Clara offered. Mama taught me. Sarah's eyes lit up. Could you teach me? Papa tried once, but he got the thread all tangled and said some words I'm not supposed to repeat. Despite the tension of the situation, Mary found herself smiling. I'm sure we could arrange something. Ethan returned with coffee and milk for the girls. They sat around the kitchen table, an awkward silence settling over the adults while the children chatted quietly. Finally. Ethan cleared his throat. I suppose I should explain myself better than I did in town. Mary nodded, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. Margaret died birthing our second child. The baby didn't make it either. His voice roughened. That was 2 years ago. Sarah and we've managed, but... He glanced at his daughter, who was showing Clara a wooden horse he'd carved. She needs more than I can give her, and the ranch needs someone who knows about running a household. Mr. Cole, Mary began, but he held up a hand. Let me finish. I know my proposal in town was crude, but I'm not a man who speaks in circles. Out here, we can't afford to... He met her eyes directly. I'm offering marriage, a partnership. You'd have equal say in the household, your own room unless you decided otherwise. Your daughter would be raised as my own. In return, I need someone to help raise Sarah, keep house, and yes, be a wife. Mary's cheeks burned at the implications, but she forced herself to be equally direct. And if I never decided otherwise? Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. Then that would be your choice. I'm not a brute. Mrs. Whitfield, I've lived without a woman's company for 2 years. I can continue if need be, but I won't lie and say I don't hope for a real marriage eventually. The honesty of it, the simple laying out of terms as if they were negotiating cattle prices, was both shocking and oddly refreshing. Mary thought of the sweet words her late husband had whispered, promises that had all turned to ash. Why us? She asked. Surely there are more suitable women, ones you actually know. Ethan was quiet for a moment, watching the girls. Sarah was demonstrating how to make the wooden horse gallop across the table, and Clara was giggling. Most unmarried women in the county are either too young or have their sights set on richer men. The widows, well, they have their own establishments, their own lives. They don't need what I'm offering. He paused. And there's something else. Mary waited. In town, when I saw you with your daughter, you reminded me of Margaret. Not in looks, but the way you held your chin up despite everything. The way you protected your girl. Margaret was like that, strong when she needed to be. The comparison to his dead wife should have concerned Mary, but something in his tone suggested he saw her as her own person, not a replacement. I need to be honest with you too, Mary said slowly. My husband didn't die in an accident. He was killed in a gambling dispute. He left debts, dangerous debts. That's why we ran. Ethan's expression didn't change. Are these men likely to find you here? I don't know. Maybe. Colorado's not so far. I've dealt with claim jumpers and rustlers. Mrs. Whitfield, I protect what's mine. The simple declaration sent an unexpected shiver through Mary. When was the last time anyone had offered to protect her? Mama. Clara appeared at her elbow. Sarah says there's a creek where we can catch frogs. Can we catch frogs if we stay? Mary smoothed her daughter's hair. We haven't decided if we're staying, sweetheart, but I like it here. Clara said simply, it smells like grass and horses, not like the city, and Sarah's nice. Ethan stood. How about this? Stay the night. There's a guest room. Tomorrow. Spend the day. See how the ranch runs. Meet the hands. Get a feel for the life. If you decide it's not for you, I'll take you back to town. Maybe help you find work at one of the establishments there. It was a reasonable offer. More than reasonable. Mary looked at Clara's hopeful face, thought of their alternatives: continued hunger, possible pursuit by her late husband's creditors, or worse. "All right," she said. "One night. We'll see how tomorrow goes." Relief flickered across Ethan's features. "Sarah, show Mrs. Whitfield and Clara to the guest room, the one that was your grandmother's." As the girls ran ahead, chattering, Ethan walked Mary up the stairs. "That room," he said quietly, pointing to a closed door, "was Margaret's and mine. This one," he indicated another door, "is mine now. Yours would be at the end of the hall." The deliberate spacing wasn't lost on Mary. He was giving her privacy, distance, the ability to choose. The guest room was simple but clean, with a bed large enough for her and Clara, a washstand, and a window overlooking the endless prairie. Someone, Ethan, she supposed, had hastily placed fresh linens on the bed. "I'll have Sarah bring up some of her outgrown things for Clara," Ethan said from the doorway. "And there might be some of Margaret's things that would fit you. Just for tonight," he added quickly. "Tomorrow we can go to town, get proper things." "Mr. Cole, Ethan," Mary said, using his given name for the first time. "Why do I feel like you'd already decided to make this offer before you saw us?" A slight smile creased his weathered face. "Maybe because I've been thinking about it for months. Just didn't know who to make it to until today." He touched his hat. "Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy, but it's filling." After he left, Mary sat on the bed, Clara bouncing beside her. "Can we stay, Mama, please? Sarah's going to show me the horses tomorrow. And she says there's a cat in the barn with kittens." Mary pulled her daughter close, breathing in the little girl scent of her hair. Outside the window, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She could see Ethan crossing the yard to the barn, his stride long and purposeful. He stopped to pat the neck of a horse in the corral, and she saw him smile. A real smile. Not the careful one he'd worn in the house. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was the desperation of their situation. But something about this place, this strange proposal, felt like a door opening when she'd thought they were all closed. "We'll see, baby," she whispered to Clara. "We'll see what tomorrow brings." As night settled over the Double C Ranch, Mary Whitfield lay in the unfamiliar bed, her daughter curled trustingly against her side, and wondered if she had the courage to reach for the life Ethan Cole was offering. It wasn't the stuff of romance novels or fairy tales. But then, fairy tales had never put food in Clara's belly or a roof over their heads, perhaps, in this harsh land. Practical proposals and honest partnerships were their own kind of love story. Dawn came early to the Double C Ranch, announced by the crowing of a rooster and the lowing of cattle. Mary woke to find Clara already at the window, her small face pressed against the glass. "Mama, look! There's so many cows!" Mary joined her daughter, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the morning chill. The view took her breath away. Rolling grassland stretched to the horizon, painted gold by the rising sun. A herd of cattle grazed peacefully, their breath steaming in the cool air. Cowboys moved among them, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Mrs. Whitfield?" Sarah's voice called. "Papa says breakfast is ready." Mary dressed quickly in her travel-worn dress, helping Clara into yesterday's clothes. They would need to address the clothing situation soon if... She pushed the thought away. One day at a time. The kitchen was warm and filled with the smell of coffee and bacon. Ethan stood at the stove, his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms marked by years of hard work. He turned at their entrance, and Mary was struck again by how different he looked from the desperate gamblers and smooth talkers she'd known. "Morning," he said simply. "Hope you slept well." "Very well, thank you." Mary felt awkward, unsure of her place in this domestic scene. "Sit," Ethan commanded gently, gesturing to the table. "Sarah, show Clara where we keep the plates." The girls bustled about, Sarah clearly enjoying her role as guide. Mary watched Ethan serve up eggs, bacon, and biscuits with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. "You cook?" she couldn't help but ask. Had to learn. Sarah can't live on jerky and cold biscuits. He set a plate before her. It's nothing fancy. Mary took a bite and found it surprisingly good. It's wonderful. Thank you. They ate in relative silence, broken only by the girl's chatter. Sarah was explaining the names of all the horses, with Clara hanging on every word. After breakfast, Ethan pushed back from the table. I need to check on the herd. Would you... He hesitated. Would you like to see the ranch? Understand what you'd be getting into? Mary nodded. It seemed practical to know exactly what this life would entail. They walked out into the morning sunshine, the girls running ahead. Ethan pointed out the various buildings, the barn, the smokehouse, the chicken coop that provided their eggs. The Hands live in the bunkhouse there. He indicated a long, low building. 6 men full-time, more during roundup. They take their meals there mostly, but Sunday dinners Margaret used to have everyone to the main house. Mary noticed how he spoke of his late wife, with respect and remembered warmth, but without the desperate grief she'd seen in some widowers. This is a lot of work for one person, she observed. It is. Ethan agreed. I've been managing, but barely. The vegetable garden's gone to seed. The house needs proper tending, and Sarah... He watched his daughter demonstrating how to climb the corral fence to Clara. She's growing up wild. Needs someone to teach her to be a lady. And if she doesn't want to be a lady? Ethan smiled, the expression transforming his stern features. Then at least someone to teach her which fork to use when the minister comes to dinner. They walked on, Ethan explaining the daily rhythms of ranch life. Mary found herself asking questions, genuinely interested in how it all worked. She'd been a town girl most of her life, but there was something appealing about the straightforward nature of this existence. The animals needed tending, the garden needed planting, the house needed keeping. Simple, clear purposes. They stopped at a small fenced area behind the house. The remnants of what had been a kitchen garden struggled among the weeds. Margaret's garden, Ethan said quietly. I've tried to keep it going, but... He shrugged helplessly. Mary knelt, running soil through her fingers. It was good earth, rich and dark. My mother had a garden, she said softly. Before she died, she taught me about growing things. It would be yours to do with as you pleased. Ethan said, the house, the garden, the household decisions, that would be your domain. Mary stood, dusting off her hands. And your domain. The cattle, the horses, the business side of ranching. But big decisions we'd make together. He met her eyes. I meant what I said about a partnership. They continued their tour, ending at the barn where Clara was in raptures over a litter of orange kittens. Sarah was explaining which one was the best mouser, which the friendliest. Can I hold one? Clara asked breathlessly. Course you can, Sarah said, scooping up a kitten and placing it in Clara's careful hands. If you stay, you can have one for your own. Mary's heart clenched at the naked hope in her daughter's eyes. When had Clara last had anything of her own? Ethan cleared his throat. I need to ride out to the east pasture. Would you be all right here for a few hours? Sarah knows where everything is. After he left, Mary found herself in the strange position of being mistress of a house that wasn't hers. Yet, she wandered through the rooms, Sarah acting as guide, pointing out where things were kept, explaining the daily routines. The house was well built and clean, but it showed its lack of a woman's touch. Curtains hung straight and utilitarian. Furniture sat arranged for function rather than comfort. The only decorative touches were a few photographs and a quilt on Ethan's bed that had clearly been Margaret's work. Papa doesn't change anything, Sarah said, noticing Mary's gaze lingering on a photograph. He says he doesn't know how to make things pretty. And you, what would you change? Sarah considered this seriously. I'd like curtains in my room, yellow ones, like sunshine, and maybe flowers on the table. Mama always had flowers. Those sound like wonderful ideas, Mary said gently. She spent the morning familiarizing herself with the kitchen, Sarah chattering about the ranch, her father, the horses she loved. Clara trailed behind them, still carrying the orange kitten, looking more content than Mary had seen her in months. When it came time to prepare the noon meal, Mary found the pantry well stocked with basics. She set about making a simple stew, Sarah watching with interest. "Papa usually just fries up some beef," the girl confided. "Nothing wrong with that, but variety's good too." Mary showed her how to cut vegetables, pleased when the girl took to the task eagerly. When Ethan returned, dusty and tired, his eyes widened at the scene in his kitchen. Mary at the stove, Sarah beside her peeling potatoes, Clara setting the table with careful concentration. Something passed over his face. Longing, perhaps, or recognition of what had been missing. "Smells good," he said gruffly. Over dinner, he told them about the morning's work, about finding a calf stuck in a ravine and hauling it out. Sarah peppered him with questions, wanting to know every detail. Clara listened with wide eyes, this glimpse into ranch life as exotic to her as fairy tales. "You did well today," Ethan told Mary as she served apple cobbler she'd made from preserved fruit. "The house already feels different." "It's just one day," Mary reminded him. But she felt it too, how naturally they'd all fallen into these roles. After the meal, while the girls played outside, Ethan and Mary sat on the porch with coffee. The afternoon stretched lazy and golden before them. "I should tell you about the ranch's finances," Ethan said. "If you're considering this, you should know what you're getting into." He laid it out simply. The ranch was profitable but not wealthy. There was money for necessities, some for savings, but luxuries were few. The cattle business was uncertain, dependent on weather and market prices. "I'm not looking for wealth," Mary said, "just security. I can offer that, and protection, as I said." He paused. "About your husband's debts, do you know who holds them?" "A man named Jake Morrison. He runs gambling halls in Denver." Mary shivered despite the warm afternoon. "Thomas owed him $500. Morrison doesn't forget debts." Ethan's expression hardened. "If he comes here, he'll find this isn't Denver. We protect our own in Cedar Ridge." The "our own" wasn't lost on Mary. He was already including her in that circle of protection. As the sun began its descent, Ethan stood. "I should get you back to town before dark, unless—" He let the word hang. Mary looked out at the ranch spread before them, at Clara and Sarah chasing chickens in the yard, at the solid house that could be a home. She thought of the alternative, the boarding house in town, the search for work that might never come, the constant fear of Morrison's men finding them. "One more night," she heard herself say. "If that's acceptable, I'd like Clara to have one more night of this." Something that might have been disappointment flickered in Ethan's eyes, but he nodded. "Of course, take all the time you need to decide." But as Mary watched him walk to the barn, his broad shoulders set against the endless sky, she suspected her decision was already made. This wasn't a love match, wasn't a romance from the novels she'd read as a girl, but it was something that might be stronger, a chance at belonging, at building something real and lasting. That night, as she tucked Clara into bed, her daughter whispered, "I love it here, Mama. Sarah's teaching me to ride tomorrow." Mary kissed her forehead, her heart full of hope and terror in equal measure. Tomorrow, she would have to choose the uncertain safety of independence or the strange security of Ethan Cole's proposal. Through the window, she could see a light burning in the barn where Ethan worked late, as she suspected he did every night. A steady man, offering a steady life. Perhaps that was its own kind of love. The second dawn at the Double C Ranch found Mary already awake, standing at the kitchen window with a cup of coffee. She'd barely slept, her mind churning over the magnitude of the decision before her. Through the glass, she watched Ethan emerge from the barn where he'd been tending a sick horse all night. His clothes were rumpled, his face drawn with fatigue, but he still stopped to check the water troughs before heading to the house. "You're up early," he said, finding her in the kitchen. "Couldn't sleep." She poured him coffee without being asked, a simple gesture that felt dangerously domestic. "The mayor's going to be fine. he said, sinking into a chair. Just colic. Mary found herself studying his face in the early morning light. Lines of exhaustion and worry creased his forehead, and she had an unexpected urge to smooth them away. "You should rest," she said instead. "Can't. Too much to do." He rubbed his eyes. "Though I suppose that's always true on a ranch." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Mary threw herself into learning the rhythms of ranch life, partly to postpone her decision, partly because she found unexpected satisfaction in the work. She rose before dawn to start bread, tended the kitchen garden, mended clothes that had been neglected for months. Her hands, soft from town living, grew calloused and strong. Clara blossomed like a desert flower after rain. Under Sarah's tutelage, she learned to ride a gentle old mare named Buttercup. Her cheeks grew rosy from the sun and wind. Her laughter rang across the yard. The hollow-eyed, hungry child from Cedar Ridge's streets was disappearing, replaced by a girl who collected eggs fearlessly and named every barn cat. Sarah, for her part, attached herself to Mary like a shadow. She absorbed lessons on cooking and sewing with surprising eagerness, though she still preferred riding to domestic pursuits. "Why does bread need to rise?" she asked one afternoon, poking at the dough Mary had set aside. "The yeast needs time to work, to make the bread light instead of heavy." Mary showed her how to test if it had risen enough. "Like people, sometimes we need time to grow into what we're meant to be." Sarah considered this seriously. "Is that why Papa's giving you time to decide about marrying him?" Mary's hands stilled. She'd maintained the fiction that she was merely visiting, though everyone on the ranch seemed to know better. "Your Papa's a patient man," she said carefully. "He's lonely," Sarah said matter-of-factly. "At night sometimes, I hear him walking around. He used to talk to Mama's picture, but he stopped a while back." Mary's heart clenched. She'd noticed it too, how Ethan sat alone on the porch after the girls were abed, staring out at the darkening prairie. How he started to say something sometimes, then caught himself, the words dying unspoken. The breaking point came on a crisp October evening. Mary was teaching Sarah to embroider, a skill the girl was struggling with, when they heard horses approaching fast. Ethan, who'd been cleaning his rifle, stood quickly. "Sarah, take Clara upstairs," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But Papa, now!" The girls scurried up the stairs. Mary started to follow, but Ethan caught her arm. "No, if this is about your husband's debts, they need to see you're under my protection." 3 men rode into the yard. Even in the fading light, Mary recognized the type. Hired guns, the kind Jake Morrison employed. The lead rider, a thin man with cold eyes, dismounted slowly. "Evening," he said, though his tone held no friendliness. "We're looking for a woman, Mary Whitfield. Heard she might have passed this way." Ethan stepped onto the porch, rifle held casually but ready. "Lots of folks pass through Texas. What's your business with her?" "She owes Mr. Morrison money. Her dead husband's debts. Mr. Morrison. He likes his accounts settled." "That's so?" Ethan's voice was mild. "Seems to me a woman shouldn't be held accountable for her husband's foolishness." The man's eyes narrowed, flicking to Mary, visible through the window. "That her?" Ethan shifted slightly, blocking the view. "The lady you see is my intended bride, soon to be Mrs. Cole. Any business you might have had with her died with her husband. Debts don't die, mister. They do in Texas, when a woman remarries." It wasn't entirely true, but Ethan's tone suggested arguing would be unwise. "Now, you've had a long ride. Town's 5 miles south. I suggest you head there before full dark. These plains are dangerous at night." The implicit threat hung in the air. Mary saw ranch hands emerging from the bunkhouse, armed and watchful. The message was clear. She was under the protection of the Double C. The lead man spat tobacco juice, his eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Mr. Morrison won't be pleased." "Then Mr. Morrison can take it up with me after the wedding." Ethan's grip on the rifle tightened slightly. "Which is happening real soon." For a long moment, the 2 men stared at each other. Then the gunman remounted. "We'll be checking on that marriage certificate," If you're lying, I don't lie, Ethan said simply. After they rode off, Mary found herself trembling. Ethan guided her to a chair, pouring whiskey with hands that were remarkably steady. Drink, he ordered gently. You just promised them we're getting married, she said, her voice shaky. I did. He knelt before her chair, his gray eyes serious. I know you wanted more time, but those men will be back. With a marriage certificate and my name, you and Clara will be safe. Without it. Mary took a sip of whiskey, feeling it burn down her throat. This isn't how I wanted to decide. I know, but sometimes life makes our choices for us. He paused. I'll keep my promises. Mary, separate rooms until you're ready. But we need to do this soon. From upstairs, she could hear Clara crying. Sarah trying to comfort her. Her daughter had recognized the type of men too. Remembered the fear from Colorado. All right, Mary said quietly. We'll marry. Relief and something else. Was it pleasure? Flashed across Ethan's face. We'll go to town tomorrow. Arrange things with Reverend Mills. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. True to his word, Ethan arranged everything quickly. The townspeople, sensing urgency, rallied around them. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, altered one of her own dresses for Mary. The general store extended credit for new clothes for Clara. It's not right. A bride without a proper dress. Mrs. Patterson tutted, pinning the blue wool. Though I suppose you frontier women are more practical about these things. Mary stood still for the fitting, her mind elsewhere. In 2 days, she would bind herself to a man she'd known for mere weeks. It should terrify her. Instead, she felt an odd calm settling over her. That evening, she found Ethan in the barn, brushing down his horse. He looked up at her entrance, something vulnerable in his expression. Having second thoughts? He asked. No. She was surprised to find it was true. Are you? He set down the brush, moving closer. I want to be clear about something. I know this started as a business arrangement, but He stopped, searching for words. I've come to care for you. Mary. You and Clara both. It may not be love yet, but it's something that could grow. Mary's breath caught. In the weeks she'd been here, she'd focused so hard on surviving, on making the right choice for Clara, that she'd ignored the growing warmth she felt when Ethan smiled, the way her heart lifted when he rode in each evening. I care for you too, she admitted softly. You're a good man, Ethan Cole. He reached out, his work-roughened hand gently cupping her cheek. After we're married, I'd like to court you proper. Take time to know each other as husband and wife should. Mary leaned into his touch, surprising them both. I'd like that. 2 mornings later, Mary stood before the mirror in her borrowed dress. Sarah and Clara fussing with flowers for her hair. The girl who'd sat desperate on Cedar Ridge's streets seemed like a stranger now. This woman looking back at her had color in her cheeks, hope in her eyes. You look beautiful. Mama, Clara breathed. Like a real bride? Sarah added, then bit her lip. I mean, Mary hugged both girls. I am a real bride, and you're both my real daughters now. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church with a handful of witnesses. Ethan stood tall and solemn in his Sunday best, his eyes never leaving Mary's face as she walked down the aisle. When Reverend Mills asked if anyone objected, Mary held her breath, half expecting Morrison's men to burst through the doors, but there was only silence. Then Ethan's strong voice promising to love, honor, and protect. Mary made her own vows, meaning every word. When Ethan kissed her, a gentle, respectful touch of lips, she felt something inside her crack open, like ice thawing after a long winter. As they signed the certificate, making it legal and binding, Mary thought about the strange twists that had brought her here. A desperate flight from Colorado, a chance meeting on a dusty street, a proposition that should have offended but instead offered hope. Ready to go home, Mrs. Cole? Ethan asked, offering his arm. Home. The word settled into her chest, warm and solid. Yes, she said, taking his arm. "Let's go home." The evening after their wedding, Mary stood in the kitchen of what was now officially her home, mechanically washing dishes while her mind churned with memories she'd tried so hard to bury. Through the window, she could see Ethan checking the horses one last time before full dark, his movements efficient and sure, so different from Thomas, who'd stumbled home at all hours, reeking of whiskey and cheap perfume. "Mary?" Sarah's voice startled her. The girl stood in the doorway, clutching her nightgown. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." Sarah climbed onto a kitchen chair, her face serious. "Did your first husband hurt you?" Mary's hands stilled in the soapy water. "Why would you ask that?" "Because sometimes you flinch when Papa moves too quick. And when those men came, you looked scared in a different way than just about money." The child's perceptiveness shouldn't have surprised her. Ranch children grew up fast, learned to read danger in the set of a horse's ears or the tension in an adult's shoulders. Mary dried her hands slowly, choosing her words with care. "He wasn't always kind," she said finally. "But that's in the past now. Papa would never hurt you," Sarah said fiercely. "He doesn't even whip the horses unless they're fixing to kill themselves or someone else." "I know." And she did know, had sensed it from that first meeting. Ethan's strength was tempered with control. His power used to protect, not dominate. Later that night, after the girls were asleep, Mary found herself alone with her new husband for the first time as man and wife. They sat on opposite sides of the parlor, the space between them feeling vast despite the room's modest size. "I should tell you," Mary began, then stopped. How did one explain years of small cruelties, the gradual erosion of self that came from living with a man who saw you as property? Ethan waited, patient as always. "Thomas wasn't just a gambler," she said finally. "He was a drinker, and when he drank—" She unconsciously touched her side, where a boot heel had left permanent marks. "He had a temper." Ethan's face darkened. "He hit you. It wasn't a question." Mary nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "Never Clara, I made sure of that. But me, I was fair game when luck ran bad or the whiskey ran deep." The silence stretched between them. Then she heard Ethan move, felt him kneel beside her chair. When she finally looked at him, his gray eyes held such fury that she drew back instinctively. "Not at you," he said quickly, seeing her reaction. "Never at you." "But if he wasn't already dead—" "He is dead," Mary said firmly. "Shot over a card game in Denver. They brought his body home, and I played the grieving widow while secretly thanking God for deliverance. Does that make me terrible? Makes you human." Ethan's hand covered hers where it lay on the chair arm. "Mary, I need you to hear this. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. Never. If I've done something to make you think otherwise, you haven't." She turned her hand palm up, lacing her fingers with his. "It's just old habits, old fears. Then we'll create new habits," he said simply. "Better ones." The next morning brought Morrison's men back, as expected. This time they came with the sheriff, a grizzled man named Walt Bradley, who'd known Ethan since he was a boy. "Got to check this marriage certificate. Ethan," Sheriff Bradley said apologetically. "These gentlemen insist." Ethan produced the document with calm efficiency. The sheriff examined it, then handed it to Morrison's lead gunman. "Appears to be in order. The lady is legally Mrs. Ethan Cole now. We'll need to verify this with the town records." The gunman said, "You do that." Sheriff Bradley's tone grew harder. "And then you'll move along. We don't cut into harassment of married women in this county, regardless of what debts their late husbands might have carried after they left." Mary sagged against the porch post. "Will they give up?" "Eventually," Ethan said. "Men like Morrison are businessmen. Once they realize the cost of collecting outweighs the debt, they'll move on to easier prey." But the damage was done. Word spread through the county about Mary's past, the debts that had driven her to Texas. Some of the ranch wives who'd been warming to her grew cool again. At church that Sunday, whispers followed her like tumbleweeds. "Hold your head up," Ethan murmured. his hand firm on her elbow as they walked to their pew. "You're a Cole now. That carries weight here." It was Sarah who suffered most from the gossip. She came home from school one day with muddy clothes and tears in her eyes. "What happened?" Mary asked, kneeling before her. "Sally Morrison said you're a fancy woman who tricked Papa into marrying you. Said her ma told her you probably killed your first husband for his money." Mary's heart sank. She'd tried so hard to protect the girls from the ugliness of gossip. "What did you do?" Ethan asked quietly. Sarah's chin lifted with stubborn pride. "I pushed her in the mud puddle. Then Clara dumped her lunch bucket over Sally's head." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Mary had to bite back a smile. "Violence isn't the answer, Sarah, isn't it?" The girl's gray eyes, so like her father's, blazed with indignation. "You're my mother now. Nobody talks about my mother that way." The fierce declaration undid Mary completely. She pulled Sarah into her arms, feeling the girl's thin shoulders shake with residual anger. "Thank you for defending me," she whispered. "But next time, use your words, not your fists." "Words don't work with Sally Morrison," Sarah muttered, but she hugged Mary back tightly. That evening, Ethan found Mary in the garden, viciously pulling weeds by moonlight. "You'll pull up the vegetables too at this rate," he observed mildly. "I hate that they're hurting Sarah and Clara because of me, because of the narrow-minded fools," he corrected. "This will pass. Mary, next month there'll be some other scandal for them to chew on. And if Morrison's men come back—" Ethan sat on the garden wall, his presence solid and reassuring in the darkness. "Then we'll deal with them, together." "Why?" The question burst from her. "Why did you really marry me, Ethan? You could have found someone without all this baggage, someone who didn't bring trouble to your door." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "My grandfather used to say that the measure of a man wasn't in avoiding trouble, but in what trouble he was willing to face for something worthwhile." He paused. "You and Clara, you're worthwhile. Mary, more than worthwhile." Something loosened in Mary's chest. A knot she hadn't realized was there. "We are. Come here." He held out a hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it, letting him pull her to sit beside him on the wall. "See that?" He pointed to the eastern pasture where a new fence gleamed in the moonlight. "I built that the week after you came. Know why?" Mary shook her head. "Because for the first time in 2 years, I had a reason to improve things, to build for the future instead of just maintaining what was." His arm settled around her shoulders, warm and secure. "The house feels alive again. Sarah smiles more, and me, I don't dread coming in from the range anymore." "Because you have a cook and housekeeper now?" "No." His voice grew husky. "Because I have you." Mary turned to look at him. This steady man who'd offered her shelter without conditions, who'd stood between her and her past without hesitation. In the moonlight, she could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he tried so hard to hide. "Ethan," she whispered. "I know we agreed to take things slow," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, but I need you to know. This isn't just convenience for me anymore. Hasn't been since that second day, when I watched you teaching Sarah to make bread and thought my heart would break from wanting that to be real." Mary's breath caught. She thought of all the small moments over the past weeks. Ethan's gentle patience, his quiet strength, the way he looked at her like she was precious rather than problematic. So different from what she'd known before. "It's not just convenience for me either," she admitted softly. His arm tightened around her. "No." "No?" She leaned into him, feeling safe in a way she hadn't in years. "Though it's hard to trust, after everything." "I know. We have time. Mary, all the time you need." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds drift across the moon. Inside the house, their daughters slept peacefully, unaware of the adult complexities playing out in the garden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison's men might return. The town gossips would continue their whispers. The ranch would demand its endless labors. But tonight, Mary allowed herself to rest in her husband's embrace, to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd found something worth fighting for. Not the desperate bargain she'd thought she was making, but something real and growing, like the vegetables struggling up through the soil at their feet. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" "For seeing Clara and me as worthwhile." Ethan pressed a gentle kiss to her temple. "Thank you for being brave enough to stay and find out." The first norther of the season blew in during the second week of November, dropping temperatures and bringing a dust storm that turned the sky brown. Mary worked alongside Ethan to secure the ranch, helping drive the cattle to sheltered areas and boarding up windows against the wind. "You don't have to do this," Ethan called over the howling gale as Mary struggled with a particularly stubborn shudder. "Yes, I do," she called back, finally wrestling it into place. "This is my ranch too now." Something flashed in his eyes, pride, perhaps, or approval. He crossed to help her with the last shudder, his body shielding hers from the worst of the wind. For a moment they stood pressed close, faces inches apart, before he stepped back. "Let's get inside before we blow away." That night, with the wind rattling the windows and the girls safely asleep, Mary found Ethan in his study going over the ranch books. She brought him coffee, a nightly ritual that had developed naturally. "How bad is it?" she asked, seeing his furrowed brow. "Cattle prices are down, if they stay low through spring." He rubbed his face tiredly. "We'll manage, but it'll be tight." Mary studied the ledgers over his shoulder. Her father had been a bookkeeper before his death, and she'd learned figures at his knee. "What if we sold some of the horses instead, kept the breeding cattle?" Ethan looked up at her in surprise. "You understand these numbers? My father taught me. I helped Thomas with his accounts too, before." She trailed off, not wanting to mention how those skills had shown her exactly how deep in debt he'd been. "Show me what you're thinking." They worked through the figures together, Mary pointing out places where expenses could be cut, suggesting alternatives. Ethan listened intently, occasionally asking questions that showed he valued her input. "This could work," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Mary, would you consider taking over the household accounts? You've got a better head for numbers than I do. You'd trust me with that?" "I trust you with our daughters. Money's nothing compared to that." The simple statement warmed her more than the fire crackling in the hearth. "Then yes, I'll do it." As she turned to go, Ethan caught her hand. "Mary, wait." She paused, looking down at him. In the lamplight, his face was all plains and shadows, handsome in its weathered strength. "I've been thinking," he began carefully, "about us, about our arrangement." Mary's heart began to pound. "Oh, it's been near 2 months since we married. I know I promised not to push, but—" He stood, still holding her hand. "I'm not a patient man by nature. Being near you every day, seeing you with the girls, watching you make this house a home, it's getting harder to keep my distance." Mary's mouth went dry. She'd felt it too, the growing tension between them, the lingering glances, the careful space they maintained that seemed to shrink each day. "What are you saying, Ethan?" "I'm saying I'd like to court my wife properly. Take you riding, just the two of us, sit with you in the evenings without feeling like I'm crossing a line. Maybe—" His thumb stroked across her knuckles. "Maybe hold your hand without wondering if I'm taking liberties." "You're holding it now," Mary pointed out, her voice barely above a whisper. "So I am." But he didn't let go. "What do you say, Mary? Can we try being truly married, not just in name?" Mary thought of all the reasons to say no, her past, her fears, the scars both visible and hidden that Thomas had left. Then she thought of these past weeks, of Ethan's quiet strength, his gentle way with the girls, his respect for her boundaries. "All right," she said softly. "We can try." Relief and joy transformed his face. He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Thank you." The courtship that followed was unlike anything Mary had experienced. Ethan approached it with the same steady determination he brought to everything. He took her riding to show her the far corners of the ranch, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his childhood. He brought her small gifts, not expensive things, but thoughtful ones. A new thimble when hers wore through, a packet of flower seeds for her garden, a hair ribbon the exact color of her eyes. In the evenings, after the girls were abed, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Ethan read aloud from the newspaper or one of the few books they owned. Sometimes they talked about the ranch, the girls, their plans for the future. And sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, Mary sewing while Ethan whittled toys for the children. The physical distance between them gradually decreased, first sitting on the same settee instead of separate chairs, then Mary's feet tucked under Ethan's thigh as she read, then his arm around her shoulders as they watched the fire die down. One evening in early December, as snow began to fall outside, Sarah approached them with uncharacteristic hesitancy. "Papa? Mary? Can I ask something?" "Of course, sweetheart," Mary said, setting aside her mending. Sarah fidgeted with her braids. "Clara asked me why you don't share a room like her parents did. I didn't know what to tell her." Mary felt heat flood her cheeks. She and Ethan had been careful to maintain appearances, but children noticed everything. "Well," Ethan began carefully, "sometimes when people get married quickly, they need time to know each other better first." "But you know each other now," Sarah pointed out with a child's simple logic. "And you like each other. I can tell." "Yes, we do," Mary said softly, glancing at Ethan. "Very much." "Then why, Sarah?" Ethan's voice held gentle warning. "Some things are private between husbands and wives." "All right," Sarah said, but she looked between them with knowing eyes before heading upstairs. After she left, an awkward silence fell. Mary stared at her hands, twisting her wedding ring, a simple band Ethan had somehow procured despite the rushed ceremony. "She's not wrong," Ethan said finally. Mary looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "We have been getting to know each other," he continued. "And I do like you, Mary, more than like... He stopped, seeming to wrestle with the words. "I'm falling in love with you. Have been since you stood up in my kitchen that first morning and told me my coffee was too strong." Mary's eyes filled with tears. "Ethan?" "You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know." He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "I know you've been hurt. I know trust comes hard. But I'm here, Mary. I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she whispered, and she did know. In every gesture, every patient moment, every gentle touch, Ethan had shown her what real love looked like. Not the passionate promises that turned to ash, but steady warmth that grew stronger each day. "I'm falling too," she admitted, the words scary and liberating at once. "It terrifies me, but I am." "Then we'll fall together," he said simply. When he kissed her, really kissed her, not the careful pecks they'd shared since the wedding, Mary felt the last of her walls crumble. This was nothing like what she'd known before. This was coming home. When they finally drew apart, both breathing unsteadily, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Your room or mine?" he asked softly. Mary's heart pounded, but for once not from fear. "Yours is bigger," she said with a shaky laugh. "Practical as always." He teased gently. Then, more seriously, "Are you sure, Mary? We can wait." "I'm sure." And she was. "I want to be your wife. Ethan, really your wife." He stood, drawing her up with him, his eyes never leaving hers. "You already are. Have been since the day you walked into my house and made it a home. The rest is just details." As he led her upstairs, Mary marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From desperation on a dusty street to this. A man who loved her. Daughters who called her mother. A home where she belonged. It wasn't the path she'd planned, but perhaps that's how the best love stories went. Not with grand gestures and dramatic declarations, but with quiet moments of choosing each other, day after day. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. But inside the coal house, warmth and love held winter at bay, and two lonely souls found in each other the home they'd both been searching for. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, with frost painting delicate patterns on the windows. Mary woke in Ethan's arms, still marveling at the warmth and safety she'd found there over the past weeks. The house was quiet, the girls still asleep, and for a moment she allowed herself to simply exist in this perfect peace. Then the door burst open and two excited girls tumbled into the room. "It's Christmas," Clara announced, bouncing on the bed. "Can we open presents now?" Sarah, trying to be more mature at 9, still couldn't hide her excitement. "Papa, you promised we could have flapjacks with molasses for breakfast," Ethan groaned good-naturedly, pulling both girls into a hug. All right, give us a moment to dress." As the girls thundered back downstairs, Mary smiled at her husband. "So much for a quiet morning." "Wouldn't have it any other way," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The Christmas celebration was modest by town standards, but rich in joy. Ethan had carved wooden dolls for both girls, while Mary had sewn new dresses from fabric she'd saved from her trunk. The girls were delighted, parading around in their finery and making their dolls dance. After breakfast, as snow began to fall again, a rider approached the house. Mary tensed, her joy dimming. Even now, months after their marriage, she feared Morrison's men returning. But Ethan, looking out the window, relaxed. "It's Sheriff Bradley." The sheriff accepted coffee gratefully, warming his hands on the mug. "Merry Christmas. Folks, sorry to intrude, but I thought you should know. Got a telegram yesterday. Jake Morrison's dead." Mary's cup rattled against its saucer. "Dead?" "Shot in Denver last month. Seems he crossed the wrong people." Sheriff Bradley's weathered face was grave. "His operation's fallen apart. Nobody's going to be collecting his old debts." After the sheriff left, Mary stood at the window, watching the snow fall. Ethan came up behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "It's over," she whispered. "That chapter is," he agreed. "Now we write a new one." But their peace was short-lived. 2 days after Christmas, one of the ranch hands rode in fast, his horse lathered with sweat. "Boss, we got trouble," Jim Barnes gasped out. "Rustlers hit the south pasture, got near 30 head. Ethan's face hardened. Rustling was a hanging offense, but catching the thieves was another matter. "How long ago?" "Trail's maybe 6 hours old. Snow's gonna cover it soon." "Saddle fresh horses," Ethan ordered. "Get Tom and Miguel. We ride in 10 minutes. "I'm coming with you," Mary said. Ethan turned to her, his expression firm. "No, it's too dangerous. I can shoot. My father taught me." She met his gaze steadily. "This is my ranch, too, remember?" They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Ethan sighed. "Can you really shoot?" For answer, Mary went to the cabinet where Ethan kept his guns. She took out a rifle, checked it with practiced efficiency, then pointed through the window at a fence post 50 yards away. The shot rang out clear and true, splintering wood from the post's top. "Well," Ethan said dryly, "get your coat." They rode hard through the falling snow, following the trail of the stolen cattle. Mary's childhood riding lessons served her well, though she knew she'd be sore tomorrow. The men had accepted her presence after seeing her marksmanship, though Jim muttered something about unusual females under his breath. The rustlers had made camp in a canyon 5 miles from the ranch boundary, apparently confident they'd gotten away clean. Ethan studied the scene through field glasses. 6 men, he reported. "Our cattle penned against the canyon wall." "We could wait for nightfall," Tom suggested. "Snow's getting heavier." Ethan replied, "Trail back will be treacherous in the dark." "We go now." They spread out, approaching from different angles. Mary's heart pounded as she crept through the scrub brush, rifle ready. This was far removed from her life as a town woman, yet she felt oddly calm. This was about protecting what they'd built, their future. The confrontation was brief but intense. Ethan's voice rang out. Drop your weapons. You're surrounded. One rustler went for his gun. Mary didn't think, just reacted, her shot taking his hat off and sending him diving for cover. The others, seeing they were outmanned and outpositioned, threw down their arms. Well, one of them sneered as they were tied up. Ethan Cole's got himself a warrior woman. Ain't that sweet? Sweet enough to put a hole in you if you try running? Mary replied coolly. Ethan's eyes met hers across the canyon, and what she saw there, pride, respect, love, warmed her more than any fire. They drove the cattle home through the worsening storm, the captured rustlers tied to their saddles. By the time they reached the ranch, Mary was nearly frozen, but triumphant. You did good out there, Tom told her as they unsaddled the horses. Real good. Not many women would have kept their nerve. That night, after the rustlers had been turned over to the sheriff and the girls were abed, Ethan found Mary soaking her sore muscles in a hot bath. Regrets? He asked, sitting on the floor beside the tub, his back against the wall. About fighting for our ranch? Never. She studied him through the steam. Were you angry that I insisted on coming? Angry? No. Scared for you? Yes. Proud of you. His voice softened. More than I can say. I'm not Margaret, Mary said quietly. It was something she'd worried about, that he wanted her to be like his gentle first wife. No, you're not, Ethan agreed. Margaret would have waited at home, wringing her hands. You grabbed a rifle and rode out beside me. You're yourself, Mary. That's who I fell in love with. Mary felt tears prick her eyes. I love you too. I should have said it Christmas morning, but you just said it with a rifle today. Ethan interrupted, smiling. Actions speak louder than words out here. A knock at the door interrupted them. Papa? Mary? Sarah's voice was small. Clara's having nightmares about the bad men. Mary started to rise, but Ethan put a hand on her shoulder. Finish your bath. I'll go. She heard him in the girls' room, his deep voice gentle as he soothed Clara's fears. Through the door, she could hear him telling a story about brave ranch women who protected their families, about how Clara and Sarah were safe because they had the strongest mother in Texas. When Mary finally emerged, she found all three of them asleep in Clara's bed, Ethan still in his clothes, one daughter tucked under each arm. She stood in the doorway, her heart so full it ached. This was what she'd been searching for without knowing it, not just safety or security, but this. A family forged not just by need but by choice, by love, by the daily decision to face whatever came together. The next morning brought news that the captured rustlers were part of a larger gang that had been terrorizing the county. The reward money would more than make up for the lost cattle and secure the ranch's finances through the winter. Seems you married a bounty hunter without knowing it, Ethan teased over breakfast. I married a rancher, Mary corrected, spreading jam on Sarah's biscuit. I became a bounty hunter to protect him. We protect each other. Clara piped up, her nightmares forgotten in the bright morning light. That's what families do. From the mouths of babes, Mary thought, meeting Ethan's eyes over their daughters' heads. They'd started as strangers bound by desperation and pragmatism. But somewhere between that first shocking proposal and this snowy morning, they'd become what Clara said, a family. The gossips in town could whisper about their unusual courtship. Morrison's legacy could try to haunt them. Rustlers could threaten their livelihood. But none of it mattered against this truth. They had chosen each other, fought for each other, built something worth protecting. Yes, Mary said, her voice strong and sure. That's exactly what families do. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, setting the snow-covered ranch sparkling like diamonds. A new day, a new year approaching. And with it, endless possibilities for the family that had found each other against all odds on the Texas frontier. Spring arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing torrential rains that turned the creek into a rushing river and made the roads nearly impassable. Mary stood on the porch, one hand resting on her expanding belly, watching Ethan and the hands work to reinforce the barn's foundation. You shouldn't be on your feet so much. Mrs. Patterson called from inside, where she'd come to help with spring cleaning. The banker's wife had become a friend over the winter months, her initial coolness thawing as she'd seen Mary prove herself. "I'm fine," Mary called back, though she did ease herself into the rocking chair Ethan had made for her. 6 months along now. She marveled at how different this pregnancy felt from her first, with Clara. She'd been terrified and alone, Thomas alternating between indifference and resentment. Now, Ethan treated her like spun glass, and the girls competed to bring her tea and feel the baby kick. "Mary! Mary!" Clara came running from the direction of the creek, Sarah close behind. Both girls were muddy to their knees, their faces flushed with excitement. "We found the perfect spot for the swimming hole Papa promised to dig," Sarah announced. "Once the water goes down, of course." Mary smiled at their enthusiasm. The girls had become true sisters over the winter, their bond sealed by shared adventures and whispered secrets. "Did you mark it so you can find it again?" "With a big pile of rocks," Clara confirmed proudly. "Papa said we could help dig it out, after the baby comes," Sarah added, placing a gentle hand on Mary's stomach. "We don't want you working too hard. Mama Mary." The name still made Mary's heart squeeze. Sarah had started using it shortly after Christmas, testing it out shyly at first, then with growing confidence. Mary had never pushed, letting the girl come to it in her own time. That evening, as the rain finally stopped, the family gathered for supper. Ethan had brought in the first vegetables from Mary's expanded garden, lettuce and radishes that tasted like spring itself. "I've been thinking," Ethan said, serving the girls seconds of stew. "With the baby coming, we might need to add on to the house, another bedroom, maybe expand the kitchen." "Can we help build it?" Sarah asked eagerly. "Don't see why not. You're both getting strong enough to hold boards while I hammer." He winked at them. "Though, Clara, you'll have to stop trying to hammer everything in sight. My thumb's still recovering from last time." Clara giggled, unrepentant. "I hit the nail too, eventually." After supper, while the girls played with their dolls by the fire, Mary and Ethan sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the rain-washed prairie in shades of gold and pink. The air smelled of sage and damp earth, promise and renewal. "I never thanked you properly," Mary said softly. "For what?" "For seeing us that day in town. For taking a chance on a desperate woman and her daughter." Ethan's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing with practiced ease. "I think I'm the one who should be thanking you. You brought this place back to life." "Mary brought me back to life." "We brought each other back," she corrected, thinking of all the ways they'd healed each other's wounds over the past months. A horse and rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Ethan tensed, his free hand moving instinctively toward where his gun would be. Old habits died hard on the frontier, but as the rider drew closer, he relaxed. "It's Jim. Wonder what brings him out this late." Jim Barnes swung down from his horse, his face split by a huge grin. "Boss, Mrs. Cole, you'll never guess what happened in town today." "Out with it, Jim," Ethan said, though he was smiling at his foreman's enthusiasm. "That fellow from Dallas, the one looking to buy breeding stock, he came back, wants 50 head of our best, offering top dollar, cash on delivery." Mary felt Ethan's hand tighten on hers. This sale would secure their future, allow for the house expansion, provide security for their growing family. "When does he want them?" Ethan asked, his voice carefully controlled. 2 weeks. I told him I'd have to check with you, but..." Jim's grin widened. He said he'd heard about the Double C's reputation, said any ranch that produced a woman who could outshoot rustlers was bound to raise the finest cattle in Texas. Mary blushed while Ethan laughed outright. "My wife's fame spreads," he teased. After Jim left with instructions to accept the deal, Mary and Ethan sat in stunned silence for a moment. 50 head at top price, Mary finally said, her mind already working the figures. "We could pay off the mortgage early, set aside money for the children's education, build that addition without worry." Ethan added, "Maybe even take a trip to San Antonio, show you and the girls the city." "I've seen cities," Mary said, leaning into his shoulder. "I prefer the view right here." 2 weeks later, The cattle sale completed successfully. The Double C Ranch was bustling with activity. Ethan had hired extra hands to help with the construction, and the frame of the addition was already taking shape. Mary supervised from her rocking chair. Her pregnancy now advanced enough that even she admitted to needing rest. "Higher on the left," she called out, watching Ethan and Tom position a beam. "It's crooked." "Woman, you're worse than a drill sergeant." Tom grumbled good-naturedly. "Which is why everything will be square and true when we're done," Ethan replied, adjusting the beam to Mary's satisfaction. The girls had been given their own project, painting the shutters for the new rooms. They worked with serious concentration. Sarah showing Clara how to make smooth strokes, both of them liberally decorated with paint by the end. As sunset approached on what would be their last evening in the original configuration of the house, the family gathered in the parlor. The room that had once felt so empty to Mary now overflowed with life. The girls' drawings on the walls, Ethan's carving projects on the mantel, Mary's sewing basket by her chair. "Tell us the story again," Clara requested, curling up against Mary's side. "About how you and Papa met. You've heard it a dozen times." Mary protested gently. "But we like it," Sarah insisted, settling on Ethan's other side. So Mary told it again, though the story had evolved over the tellings. The desperate woman on the steps had become a brave mother protecting her child. The gruff rancher with the shocking proposal had become a lonely man with a good heart. And the bargain born of necessity had become a love story. "And then what happened?" Clara prompted, though she knew perfectly well. "And then," Ethan picked up the tale. "That brave woman and that lonely rancher discovered that sometimes the best families are the ones you choose. They learned that home isn't just a house or a piece of land, but the people who stand beside you. Through rustlers and storms and gossips and everything." Sarah added, "Through everything," Mary confirmed, her hand resting on her belly where new life grew. "Because that's what families do." Later that night, as they lay in bed listening to the spring peepers through the open window, Ethan pulled Mary close. "No regrets?" "How could I regret the best decision I ever made?" She turned in his arms to face him. "Though if you'd led with, 'I have a ranch and 2 daughters who need you,' instead of that shocking statement about your bed, would you have listened? Or would you have run like a spooked Mustang?" Mary considered this. "I might have run," she admitted. "I was so scared then, so sure I couldn't trust again. And now? Now I know that trust isn't given all at once. It's built day by day, choice by choice." She kissed him softly. "You've earned mine 1,000 times over, Ethan Cole." "And you mine," he replied. "My warrior woman, my unexpected blessing." As they drifted towards sleep, Mary could hear the girls whispering in their room, planning all the things they'd do once the baby arrived. Outside, a coyote called to its mate across the prairie, and the night wind carried the scent of rain and new growth. The morning would bring more work on the addition, preparations for the baby, the 1,000 tasks that made up ranch life. There would be challenges ahead. There always were on the frontier, but they would face them as they'd learned to face everything, together. The house stood solid against the vast Texas sky, no longer empty but filled with laughter and love. Inside, a family born not just of blood but of choice, of courage, of the daily decision to build something beautiful in a harsh land. Settled into sleep, and in her dreams, Mary saw it all. The seasons turning, children growing, the ranch prospering under their united care. She saw Sarah becoming a young woman who could ride and rope as well as any hand, but also knew which fork to use at dinner. She saw Clara confident and strong, no longer the frightened child from the boarding house steps. She saw the baby to come, raised in love and security. Most of all, she saw Ethan beside her through it all, her partner, her unexpected love, her home, in the wild Texas frontier, where survival often depended on practical choices rather than romantic notions. Mary and Ethan Cole had discovered a truth as old as the land itself, that the strongest families are sometimes the ones forged not by chance, but by choice. that love can grow from the most unlikely beginnings. And that home is not a place, but a promise to stand together against whatever storms might come. The Double C Ranch stood as proof that on the frontier, courage came in many forms. Sometimes it was facing down rustlers with a rifle, sometimes it was taking a chance on a stranger, and sometimes it was simply the courage to open a wounded heart and love again. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you enjoying this tale from? Please share your location in the comments below so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and let us know your thoughts on Mary and Ethan's journey. Did their practical beginning that blossomed into true love touch your heart as much as it touched ours?